talking about it, actually. I had my first involvement with a student organization on campus with the Residence Action Council as a freshman, which is an organization that unites every hall council from the various residence halls across the university and works on issues that affect all on-campus students. I was an executive with that organization when I met Gabby Baca, who at the time was the residential life senator with the Senate at that time. And so she and I became close because she worked closely with our organization to get a feel of what on-campus residents' needs were. And that spring, she ran a campaign for president of Senate. This was during some controversial years where the leadership of Student Senate was kind of in question, and so she expressed to me that she wanted to put together a ticket from that was built from a lot of leaders across various organizations. As I mentioned, we'd already worked together before, so that was my first experience being brought into the Senate community. Gabby recruited me to run with SOS for OU was the name of the ticket at the time, and I just absolutely fell in love. I had always been sort of envious of Student Senate. I had watched a lot of great leaders. I kept up with everything that Student Senate did, and I recognized that the students who worked with Senate were confident, were energetic, and passionate about campus issues, and I kind of had always wanted to be one of them. So being roped into a Student Senate campaign was sort of a dream come true for me. I fell in love with the process, I made great relationships, and I became really energized about the idea of serving as a representative. So we won, and that was when I served my first year as the College of Health Sciences and Professions Senator, and it all just kind of snowballed. Ran for the first time going into my junior year. So this was I was a sophomore during my first campaign. So then I served my first term as a junior. So then from there it would I served a full year in Senate and had a number of involvements outside of my seat with various committees who were doing some bold things for Senate at the time, such as amending the Constitution and working on the judicial panel referendum, things like that. And so my involvement on that level helped me to establish great relationships with some veteran members of Senate, and that was when I decided to run for the vice president's position, just from extensive work. So during my second year, my second campaign was my campaign for vice president. It was for the 2016-2017 Senate, so I was running at the beginning of 2016. Interesting question. I think I was probably one of the only executives that was not either leaving Senate permanently after their role or who was not graduating, um, which was kind of it was an exciting responsibility to take on running as an executive after only 1 year of experience on Senate and running as a junior as opposed to a senior, um, or excuse me, running as a senior who knew that they would have a fifth year. So at that point, I was running for an executive position, but I knew that I would have a year on at Ohio University afterwards, um, and so I decided to serve my role and carry out all of the initiatives that we had run on, just as I would as if it were my last year at all being involved in Senate, and see how things carried out. And we had an absolutely incredible experience. And at the time when my vice president's term was drawing to an end, folks were asking that question, if I would participate in a campaign again, if I would run for an executive position. And it was fairly easy to determine for me that I had kind of served my time, taken that seat for long enough. There were so many young and involved and passionate and very talented young members of Senate who were ready to step up and take an executive role that to me it made no sense to try to serve a second position as an executive. I thought that I could be far more beneficial to the organization to serve in a different role from having had the perspective of serving on a senator level and as an executive. And I also knew that it would be most beneficial to myself to be able to remain involved with Senate, but then also take a step back from the executive's role and make sure that I could graduate essentially and just kind of focus on my own personal So as a member of staff, I am not a voting member, which means that it's not required that I attend all the GBMs or be voting on every piece of legislation that Senate passes, but I still am allowed that opportunity. So the excellent thing about this is that as a staff member, I can be just as active and involved with the initiatives that Senate is putting on, but from sort of a different role, as I mentioned, because I don't have a vote. So my only presence is as someone who can contribute to conversation, but not necessarily influence the way that legislation will go. And so having spent a few years in the Senate body and seeing the types of opportunities that senators are presented with, and then also having the perspective of listening to the alumni and the executives and hearing what type of development they would like senators to be able to have as they're present in this body, I took on the role of Director of Professional Development to kind of take the combination of those experiences and design opportunities for senators to be able to develop as professionals or experience an educational opportunity that they may not have if they had not been a member of Senate, or that they may not be experiencing because their time is taken by participating in Senate. So some of the initial ideas that were presented to us were things like working with various diverse groups, working against misogyny in the workplace, working with team building, working with leadership and mindfulness and how to put your role as a student leader into practice. And so taking on this role for me has really been exciting because I have loved to take the perspective that I've had from my years of experience, but then also the input that the rest of Student Senate has given me to try to design a professional development experience that is unique to this group, but then also complements and supplements what it is that they're doing. I think that my time as an executive in a different organization before I joined Senate sort of primed me with the organizational skill and the communication skill that I would have needed to be able to keep up with my responsibilities in Senate. So having dealt with working with an organization, having dealt with contacting members of the administration, things like that. But then I would also say that it is as a direct result of being a part of Senate and really experiencing that complete immersion in the leadership opportunities that Student Senate has to offer that really allowed me to grow into myself as an independent professional. And working with Senate is unique because you're no longer operating as a member of an executive board of an organization that already has the rules laid out for them. We have the opportunity to develop initiatives for ourselves and pursue them or not. And so Senate has absolutely primed me, my experience with this group has absolutely primed me to step into the professional world outside of Ohio University, knowing how to work independently on an initiative that might not have backing, or reach out to learn more about something I'd like to pursue from someone who is entirely separated from me. So I believe that my prior experience with student organizations has absolutely aided me. However, the person that I am as a professional was entirely because of my involvement with Senate. And I think that that is an opportunity that any member of Senate would have to grow as a professional, regardless of whether or not they had previous experience. Definitely have experienced challenges in all of those facets. With my constituents, there is certainly the disheartenment that comes with non-response or non-engagement. I think that one absolutely wonderful unifying thing about the members of Student Senate is that they're really passionate and excited about what it is that they're working on. And as I mentioned, it's sort of discouraging to encounter a group of students who may not care at all about what it is that you want to talk to them about, or who may not show up for the event that you put a lot of work into because you think it will be beneficial for them, which I think is an excellent lesson in failure, because the truth of it is, if the students aren't engaged in what it is that I'm doing, then maybe I'm not doing the right thing. And so that has certainly been a consistent challenge as a member of Senate, but it has also been a great guide, because I think the students respond in sync with the things that they're interested in, which really allows Senate to shape its course. With other members of the body, and particularly as an executive, I absolutely faced a number of challenges, and not just necessarily with dissent, although that is a good one, a good one to experience, because who knew that you may not always have the ideas that are the best, or you may not always be doing things in the way that is the best for the organization. But I think that it was very natural to come across challenges such as members who would become disengaged, members who disagreed with the way a process was being carried out, members who disagreed with the way that the executives would either conduct themselves or bring about an idea, whatever it may be, which was an absolutely wonderful lesson in learning how to manage people, but also how to be a part of a group on the same level, how to unify, and think of my role not as an executive or not as a manager and not as a superior, but as a person who signed on to simply lead a group of people who all are unified in the mission that they want to carry out. And the challenges that I experienced with my colleagues in Senate really humbled me, because it allowed me to step outside of the executive's office a little bit and focus more on being a member of this group and empowering them to do what it is that they wanted to do, rather than trying to force the group to follow the ideas that I thought were the best. And so personnel and communicative issues like that were certainly a wonderful lesson in sort of a similar thing, learning how to operate with others in the real world, because it's very much what the real world is like. And so I appreciate my Senate experience, particularly as an executive, for that reason. And then I think with the administration, I would say my challenges were similar to that with the student body, and lent similar lessons. So there were times when the administration was really engaged with the things that we would bring up to them and responsive, and would even create channels to resources that I may not have been able to access without them. And there were other times when they simply disapproved of something that I wanted to talk about, or would write us off, or maybe not be quite so engaged with something that I thought was really exciting. And what that allowed me to do, on one hand, was to realize that it is important to shape your initiatives to the people that you're working for. And so that was a great opportunity to step back and remember that although the administration is a great guide for us, I'm here on behalf of the students. And so if the administration doesn't want to hear something, but the student body still wants that message pushed, it's my job to continue to fight for that to be brought to the table. But on another hand, that maybe the disengagement of others is sort of a sign that I may be doing things the wrong way. And so all of those things were, punches to the chest each time. But it was really just a matter of picking yourself back up and remembering that the challenges that we face are just because everyone's thinking differently about how to accomplish a similar goal. Certainly one of the accomplishments during my time in Senate that I will always be the most proud of is the establishment of the judicial panel and the establishment of the referenda system. And both of those things are a major accomplishment to me because they helped move Senate forward by keeping them accountable. So creating the judicial panel allowed us to take the work off of the Board of Elections that was being recruited every year. They allowed us to implement a system that kept Senate accountable to its rules. So for example, when I first came onto Senate, the student body was sort of disengaged with student Senate in general. There was a general attitude towards Senate that nothing really mattered once they were elected, and that they would just do what they pleased anyway, and that they were student Senate in general was full of themselves and didn't care about keeping to their own rules, would just do whatever pleased them. And so establishing the judicial panel was a method for us to hold the Senate body accountable to its own rules, so that in the future the organization would be able to keep strong no matter who was elected, because we knew that there was one system that was being held in place, and that there would always be this judicial panel to hold the elected senators accountable and not allow them to pretend to be champions for the student body and not actually be doing anything. And that took a lot of work to put in place, and so I am proud of that one. I'm particularly proud of establishing the referenda system because this has been an idea that was discussed in many previous Senates. So the idea was not mine, nor was it of the executive team that established it with me. The idea was born with Gabby Baca, who was the president that pulled me onto Student Senate in the first place. And she had discussed the idea of a referendum or a campus-wide polling system with many members of the Alumni Society. And for the similar reasons as the judicial panel, it presents a way to hold Student Senate accountable. So if there is an issue that is important enough to all of campus that we feel that it shouldn't just be Student Senate speaking on it, that we wanted the entire student body to be able to place their vote as a way of solidifying their view on a particular issue, we wanted them to be able to do that. And so implementing the referenda gives us now a system to say, we think that Student Senate should not be allowed to be the only student voice on this. We want to be able to present data to the administrators, for example, or we want to have a survey that says 13,000 students feel this way, as opposed to the same 10 students that you see every week feel this way about this thing. So I think those are probably the two accomplishments in Senate that I am the most proud of. I thought about this one in particular, but yes, I'm incredibly proud of the three women who are leading this incoming ticket, and I think that they represent a voice that is very important for femme identifying folks to hear, and doing it in such a visible way as a Student Senate campaign also allows anyone to see it, and I think that that's very important. I am excited about the fact that, especially now in times where we're seeing that advocacy does create change, I think that it's important that femme identifying folks on campus see that being a male or being older or having years of experience in Student Senate is not a requirement to take on this leadership role. This is a wonderful display of three strong, confident, and passionate women who are also at the same time actively engaging with the student body while they're running. And so I think it's important to highlight that my support for this ticket is not because the leadership are three women. It's also because the women are strong and capable and ideal candidates. I think that anyone on campus who has ever even had the idea planted in the back of their mind that, I could run for a leadership position, but maybe it's not for me because I'm a freshman, or I could try out this role in a student organization, but it seems to be led by all men and I would be the only girl in the room. I think particularly for women and female identifying folks, having such a strong group of women ready to present themselves as leaders and say, you can do this too, is really incredible. And I think this is the perfect time for it. So I'm excited to see what they do, and I'm excited that the rest of the Student Senate, or a large number of Student Senate, seem to be backing them, but not because they're women, not because it's time to get women in office, but rather because these are the three best candidates for the job. And personally, I think that's the best thing that we could be seeing right now is a direct expression that we're not choosing these women because we think it's time for women, but we're choosing these women because these three are the best candidates. And I think that's the perfect display of what kind of leadership female and femme identifying folks are capable of. I'm excited to see what they do. Very proud of that, and you can tell that there's been intentional effort by the ticket to get voices from every aspect of the student experience onto this ticket, which I think is an incredibly important thing. As you mentioned, it's obvious, and I think another important thing is that the ticket is expressing it, that there are folks of liberal ideology, folks of conservative ideology, folks from different economic backgrounds, folks from different geographic locations, and as you mentioned, the direct effort to get diverse voices into the room, I think, is really what makes a difference, because you could, seek to fill seats with whoever you'd like that you think would draw attention, but when it comes down to it, Student Senate is going to end up discussing issues that will impact the student body, and so to make sure that you as a leadership have filled the room with people who will have different perspectives on this idea, I think is a really responsible thing. I think that they are, by doing so, doing their due diligence to the student body to make sure that the proper conversation's being had. I think that's the type of leadership that we need to see. And I hope that the administration is taking that into account and seeing how the conversations will change because there are those kind of diversities. Sure. And I think that those should be addressed on two different planes of sorts. So first I'll address voter turnout. I would reassure folks who are concerned that consistently over the course of the past few years, Ohio University as a campus has either hit the national average or been slightly above the national average for voter turnout. So sometimes seeing those numbers in the low thousands, seeing that 10% of the student body voted or 12% at most of the student body voted in an election, that's a disheartening thing to see. But I am optimistic because, as I mentioned, that number seems to be consistent nationwide. And so despite the various efforts that in my history I have seen elections committees and executives and entire student senates put forward in an attempt to draw students into the vote, the reality is that there is only going to be a certain small sector of campus that will engage with the vote. And there seems to be, in recent history, not much that we can do to change that. And so the challenge that I think is important from that is to do everything that you can as a ticket to build the team that you know would be best for campus. Like, as we discussed before, being sure that you're getting all of the various voices of campus into the same room and making sure you're doing your due diligence in that way. But I think that if a ticket does its best to recruit folks from every walk of life and who have various experiences on campus, and if they have a platform that is well built and they have a series of initiatives that they're ready to carry out, then I don't think that voter turnout will really predict the success of that Senate for the next year, because we know that the student body won't really be engaged until something happens that they care about. And statistically, we know that the student body doesn't really care about student senate. So I think that's okay. I think that we should continue to do our best and conduct our best efforts to increase voter turnout and make sure that we are having as loud of a conversation as we can possibly have about student senate elections, just to be sure that we're doing our jobs properly and that anyone who wouldn't know would be drawn in. But I would encourage folks to not be disheartened by a lowish voter turnout, just because we know that it will probably be that way. In regards to an uncontested ticket, I do think it's a shame because I do, as a previous executive, understand the work that it takes to put a ticket together and how prepared you are for that competition. But I think that this ticket being uncontested, if nothing else, has allowed them to display their excellent preparation and how passionate they are about holding the seats, and the fact that they have a wonderfully prepared campaign and platform, and that they're ready to come forward to the student body. And I also truly admire the way that this ticket has adjusted to running uncontested, rather than falling back from the campaign trail, as they certainly could have, because they'll almost certainly be elected. They have chosen to adjust, and instead of discussing why their ideas might be better than others, they're standing in front of the students on College Green asking, okay, we're here now, we're uncontested, what can we do for you? I've seen sticky notes on trifold boards at their tables, like asking for ideas from the student body. And I think that that's really impressive. And so I would say a similar thing in regards to running uncontested as I did to a low voter turnout, that running without competition does not detract from the excellence of the ticket or the potential that they have to execute really, really incredible things for the student body. It just means that it's one less obstacle in the way of them being able to do that. And so I would hope that they continue to do what they're doing now, which is reach out, since they don't have competition, to the student body to see what kinds of ideas they'd like to hear. And I look forward to seeing their increased efforts to engage the students, because now we know this presents us with a challenge, which is that no one wanted to run for student senate from outside the Senate. So they have a great starting point when they enter office, knowing that they need to be able to engage students from outside student senate to be incentivized to run. So it's a new initiative to work on. Write you a book on advice for vice presidents, but I think I will save that for transition reports or letters. For those who would choose to fill the Director of Professional Development position, I would say that my biggest piece of advice is to really tailor the experiences that you're trying to provide to what your Senate needs. Your role as the Professional Development Director is to supplement everything that they have already, as opposed to providing an environment that you think would be good for them and then try to have them match their schedules to it. So that's been a challenge for me this year. I'm really trying to solicit feedback from the group and come up with an experience around that. But I would say that's my biggest piece of advice for that particular role. As far as general membership in the Student Senate, I'd say I have a few pieces of advice that I think are important. One of which is that your identity as a student will stay with you regardless of your role, regardless of how engaged you are with your initiative at any one point in time. And I'm sure this is something that they'll hear frequently, but your status as a student is the most important to your success. And while you were running for, had been elected to this role, being able to keep up with schoolwork and being sure to practice self-care, making sure that you as a person are still functional and still healthy and still keeping up with the things that are important to your health to keep up with. I think that's one of the biggest challenges and one of the most important things to do. Above all, I would say that my most important piece of advice would be to not allow yourself to disengage from the mission. I love the energy that exists during campaign season because students are reflecting every day on how passionate they are about being a member of Student Senate. Having to campaign to people forces you to think and speak on why it is that you care about this, and it makes you want it because you're talking about it every single day. But it is so much easier to be in week 6 in the office with an exam tomorrow and 3 papers due the day after that, and to really wonder, if your committee meeting or if your initiative is the most important thing to think about at this moment. And so I think that it is a continual challenge, but something that's important for future members of Senate to remember is that there are others who would kill to be in your place, and that your role as a representative of the entire student body is a valuable one, and that there will always be time to be sure that you are doing everything that you can to maximize your time as a member of Student Senate. And I think that that's something that we all could do better, but is important to keep